Welcome to the podcast where it's really about discovering stories, discovering experiences, discovering wisdom beyond the mainstream, and with the sole intention to expand our mind, expand our consciousness, our awareness of what's happening on this planet in our reality, then to also shape our actions and to come from a more holistic understanding of who we are, what it means to be a human, what it means to live together on this planet, and that we are by far not disconnected, but we're together in this lifetime on this planet. And by sharing different angles, different stories, it's really a tool to expand our mind, to really become the driver of our circumstances, and to take action, step out of being a driver, passenger, and shape a world we all would love to live within. And it's a true pleasure to have you, Etienne, here as a guest. Just as a bit of context, the two of us, we met during the Alt MBA, a program organized by Seth Godin, which is the marketing guru, and where it was very much about also working in a team, discovering, training, empathy. And that's also why your person, like since then, stuck with me, because I remember there was little exercise. I don't remember the exact constellation, but I remember you sharing, I think it was a story, a video about you having a conversation with your employees, with your family, you called it, where like just listening to your words, it was so inspiring, because I felt literally how your company, like the employees working for you, are part of your extended family, and you cared so deeply about their well-being. That's like stuck at that time with me, and especially with the context now of what we are going to talk about. It is like, on the one hand, so nice that there are like these entrepreneurs who care deeply about the employees, but then also like going through a very difficult time. And at the end, maybe you can share a bit of your background, what you're doing, where you're living, and welcome.
Thank you, Simon. I feel very welcome, and it's a pleasure to give you time. Trust that I'll be able to add some value to your listeners. And want me to give you a bit of context now? Yes, I'm a father of 4 kids, 16, 14, 12, and 10, and very happily married for almost 20 years, living in Plettenberg Bay in South Africa now. I am currently still the business owner of 5 businesses, but 3 of them are more than likely going to be closing down fairly shortly, simply to try and cut and reduce exposure to any kind of overwhelming debt. So soon most likely to be just the owner of 2 businesses, and probably employing about 150 people. Prior to COVID hitting South Africa, and post COVID, I'm not sure, but certainly that number will have reduced by 75% at least. So looking at very, very big mass retrenchments coming fairly shortly across the board. So yeah, what a pleasure to be here, Simon, and my time is yours.
Thank you very much. And I think we had a conversation 2 or 3 weeks ago. So since we did this program together, once in a while we come together, a group of us, exchanging where we are in life. And you shared a bit about what you're going through, what is the situation in South Africa in regards to, you mentioned that the lockdown. I'm here in Switzerland. I'm exposed to like mainly information concerning Switzerland, Europe, maybe US, and now it's going back to normal. The lockdown is over here in Switzerland. We're starting going back to the offices again, restaurants are opening, and kind of like the common theme is, okay, now we're going back to normality. But then also there was, it's called the International Labour Organization, it's part of the United Nations, published a report that nearly half of global workforce, 1.6 billion people, especially informal workers, are at risk of losing their livelihoods. And that's just such an incredible like headline. And like we tend here, especially, and that's why I wanted to speak here, to you and to help you like paint a bit what it actually means, and like how the situation is in different parts on this planet. Because here it's more the narrative of going back to normal. It was a one-time thing, and didn't really impact us, because here it was basically sitting at home, but everything else like was kind of normal. It was like an extended holiday. Like I know like people died, and like I'm not neglecting that one, but if we listen to like your situation, that paints a completely different picture of what is happening right now. And I wanted to get you here to help us understand what's happening right now, to create awareness, and then also take action, like think outside of like our little bubble we're creating here. And when we and also like questioning the potentially the news or the situations we are facing. Because one of the things like stuck very much with me when we had our conversation 2-3 weeks ago was that the situation in South Africa is very different to, like, first of all, here in Europe. Like what you said, that a large, like, you may correct me if that's wrong, like something like 90% of the population is living in townships, right? So
yeah, it's a very, very large percentage of the population that lives in the townships, yes.
And then you might also like then question, like, does a lockdown, like, and you might describe it then, like basically the stop of business activities, like how was the situation? How was it, like, with the lockdown? How did it manifest in South Africa? Like
I think to maybe just start off by saying I was highly impacted by a talk that I went to about a year ago, where I listened to a very well-respected investigative journalist here in South Africa come up to the platform and start describing something which really, really stimulated my mind. It troubled me enormously. He came up to the podium and he said, across the globe, we speak about growing our economies by 5, 6, 7, 8, 10% every year. And he said, at some point, you have to take stock of that statement and think about how long we can continue to grow economies on this planet by 5 to 10% a year. And he said that he felt like we might be coming to a place where, instead of consistently discussing job creation, which is such a huge topic amongst many countries, he said, what happens if we start talking about a future where there are no jobs? And it was one of the most arresting statements that I'd ever heard anyone say, because there was just no thinking prior to that of what a world would look like where there were no jobs. One seems to think that it is the responsibility of governments to put legislation in place and policy in place that can grow economies and continue to provide jobs for people. And ultimately, if you think about it, it's just not sustainable to continue to grow that indefinitely. And so when that statement was made, it was very, very powerful for me to go away from that conversation and actually think that that would ever happen. And if you can believe it or not, COVID hit us, and it hit us from the side. It was not something that we in South Africa even knew about. I remember leading up to the day that the president announced lockdown here in South Africa, there wasn't a person in South Africa that actually thought it was real or that it was really happening. We had news that it was something that had happened in China, and that it came from a place called Wuhan, and it was out of a lab, and that it was fairly serious. But in South Africa, we honestly were just not aware of the impact that it was about to have on us. And then the president came up and he spoke, and he said that we were going into lockdown, and he took action very, very, very quickly. You know, we were given 3 days warning in South Africa. And so from nothing, we were told, look, the president is going to address us. And then he addressed us, and we were given 3 days. He said in 3 days' time, basically the country shuts down and goes into lockdown. And you know, I don't always have my facts 100% straight, but I am of the understanding that South Africa is enduring one of the hardest and most severe and intense lockdowns across the globe. I'm talking about no cigarettes have been sold or allowed to be sold since the start of lockdown, and continues. So no one has been allowed to buy a cigarette in South Africa since the 26th of March. We're almost at the end of May, and we've now just entered another level, and we still can't buy cigarettes. So all smokers in the country have not been allowed to buy cigarettes. We haven't been allowed to buy alcohol since the 26th of March. We believe that from Monday we can start buying alcohol again, but there's been a complete ban on alcohol. The lockdown has been very, very, very severe. And I think initially the government was praised and you know, congratulated at their swift response to the COVID pandemic and the 3-week lockdown. And after 3 weeks, we were told we had to go a further 2 weeks, so we went to 5 weeks. And then we were told that there was going to be a phased opening up of our economy. And a phased opening up was then, you know, it takes a really long time to start working through the implications of what it means to half open up an economy and open it up at different levels, because we're so connected as people. You know, our economies are so connected and so linked. It's very, very hard to open up a part of the economy and not have it impact another part of the economy. You know, you're talking about logistics and communications, and I mean, there's just so many integrated markets that it's very hard to open up. Sorry, Simon.
No problem.
Don't take it too far away because it's my internet. So I think that precluding the discussion, it's been an unimaginable world that we're living in right now here in South Africa. I don't think prior to COVID we could have ever dreamt that this would be our reality 2 months later. Even now, as of Monday, we go to what is called level 3 with a whole new set of regulations. Still no cigarettes, but alcohol. Still, we cannot go to the beaches. We can't go to public parks. We can't gather more than 10 people. We still can't go and see family. We still can't go and see friends. And yeah, ultimately from a business and from a job creation point of view, and from that, what we have seen is a total collapse of our economy. If you can imagine any business that is required to shut down in 3 days' time and have no revenue income for 2 months, and then be told even after that you're going to be remaining in lockdown for an indefinite period, because we still have no idea when we're going to be out of lockdown. The trading conditions are unimaginable. And what has happened is that as an employer, we've been forced to temporarily suspend our employment contracts with all of our employees. So it literally means that people are sitting at home with no jobs and in a kind of state it's a temporary position, but it's a temporary position with no end in sight, or no communicated end in sight from the government. So it's a very, very precarious position that we find ourselves in. And as you go into a phased opening of the economy, you are allowed to only bring staff back that you need. Initially, level 5 lockdown in South Africa is the total complete lockdown. Only emergency services, which is described as emergency would be if you've got electrical stuff in your house that's causing a problem, if you've got plumbing in your house that's causing a problem, if you've got obviously hospital emergencies, if you've got any of those kinds of things, then people can come to your house and they can work. But the amount of paperwork and documentation that is required to not get stopped by the police or the army is quite extensive. So it's terribly, terribly strict. And what has happened is that probably 70% of our entire workforce is sitting at home doing nothing. And yeah.
Well, one of the things when we had our conversation, it like logically didn't make so much sense, right? That on the one hand you have in South Africa, specifically, you could argue that the lockdown makes sense. Like, for example, in Switzerland, where everybody then has an isolation at home. But if I like you may correct me if that's wrong, but like from what I heard in South Africa, large proportion of the population is living in townships. It's kind of like it's a situation where many people are living together in a very close environment, so that there is not really like an isolation is not really possible in any case. Is that like?
Yes, I can completely agree with you. The feedback that we're getting from all the people that we speak to that live in townships is that the townships have never, ever been in a state of lockdown, even from the first day that the president asked us to go into lockdown, simply because it's not possible for them to do that. You'll find that there might be a community of 1,000 people or more that share one tap for their source of water. And they might share maybe 10 or 15 toilets. So you understand very quickly that the concept of lockdown is not something that is possible in those environments, and it's a very, very large portion of our population that lives like that. So the lockdown has really been for the middle class to upper class within South Africa that are living in houses and in suburbs. And ultimately, those are the people that are the employers. Those are the employers of the poorer people. And with their businesses collapsing, you can only imagine what's actually happening. It's hard not to imagine that we are facing a very real possibility of civil unrest, which is hard to explain right now, because you know, there's a huge amount of charity going out and food parcels going out, and the government is certainly helping where they can. But what we are finding is that when you start making rules, you find that you don't always think through your rule making that carefully, and you end up having to make more rules and more rules and more rules to try and control the situation. And it goes without saying that feeding millions of people indefinitely is not sustainable. So at some point, this thing could turn and transform into civil unrest that I don't think we would like to see. But it seems to be heading in that direction.
Well, thank you very much. And one of the things is, like, my wife Brenda is coming from Mexico, so I know the situation there. But here in Europe or maybe the US, like you might say, maybe in the US, I think there's something close to 30 million unemployed people right now, and many of them, maybe the situation is similar. But here in Europe, it's okay, I lose my job, I'm not producing, I'm using my savings. Yeah, so people are sitting at home, but I mean, their comfort level is not really touched. But like if we go to countries like Mexico or um, South Africa, like from what I understand, if someone like loses their job, that has very direct consequences in terms of there's not really a savings account or something you can.
Yeah, no, Simon, I would say that of our workforce,
yeah.
At one of our businesses, which is a manufacturing environment, we employ about 80 people there, and all 80 people there, one doesn't want to say that they're living on the breadline, but the concept is that they literally live from one paycheck to the next. So if they don't get a paycheck, then they don't have money to buy food to live. And what makes that significant is that each person that is working for us is more than likely supporting 5 to 7 people off that salary as well. And so when you start looking at the exponential numbers of people that are being directly impacted by the economy being closed, it's terribly, terribly troubling to be going through this. And one is waking up almost every day of your life going, is this real? Is this really, really happening? And what makes it even more challenging to understand is that it would appear that the scientific evidence of keeping you in lockdown of this level is not founded. A very simple statistic that we keep quoting is that in South Africa, every single year in South Africa, 66,000 people die of tuberculosis. Every year. And as a South African citizen prior to COVID, we didn't even know that statistic. That wasn't even something that was put through mainstream media or social media or communicated 24/7 on a television or anything like that. But 66,000 people in South Africa die every year of tuberculosis. That's not to mention AIDS or cancer or road deaths or anything like that. And I think to date, in the 2 months that we've been in lockdown, we've lost less than 500 lives to COVID. So it's just very, very, very hard for us as the citizens of South Africa to understand why we are forced to remain in a state of lockdown. And even as you and I are talking now, we still have absolutely no idea when we're going to be let out of these lockdown levels. So as a business, you can't do any kind of planning. Within the first 5 weeks of doing of lockdown, I must have done about 20 cash flow projections based on new information that kept being given out. First, you closed for 3 weeks, then you closed for an additional 2 weeks. Then you get told there'll be a phased opening of the economy, but you don't get told when the phased reopening will happen. Then a month later, when they come out with the phased opening of the economy plan, you very quickly realize that they're not going to tell you when you're going to go to those various levels. And so as a business, you are absolutely incapable of making any decisions, and you can't even communicate to your staff to tell them when you feel you can open again. So your staff can't even make a decision on whether to resign and try and claim their pensions, or whether to resign so that they can go to the unemployment insurance fund and try and get some kind of money to live for the next 12 months. So it's a very, very tricky situation for everybody at the moment.
Wow, that's quite some information. And as you mentioned before, so basically right now the government is providing for like a large proportion of the population. Are they
yes
covered, supported,
yes.
or is like
yes, the government is
care, or and but then just you might then just ask, why are we doing this, right? Logically it doesn't really make a lot of sense if the large proportion is anyway not isolated. On the other hand, we don't have really a lot of COVID cases. It's and from what you
a lot of what the government is doing right now is very, very hard to understand, and in a sense it plays into the hands of a of a country that has quite a colorful historic past. And as I'm sure most people already know, it's a very, very diverse country with very diverse cultures and very diverse people in it with a very colorful past. So you can imagine the amount of stress and anxiety and anger and hatred and agreement and disagreement that is busy taking place in the country. It's on unprecedented and unimaginable levels, as I said before, to try and comprehend what is happening. But what seems to be fairly clear to us is that the initial reason for the lockdown has been lost in the decisions that are being made, and they seem to now be far more politically motivated decisions than purely COVID-related decisions. So it would be under the mask of COVID, and certainly, yes, we must still do all of these things because of COVID, but the science is not backing up the decisions. And it doesn't seem justifiable in any sense. So it does become very, very hard to continue to abide by the legislation that keeps coming out for the new levels of lockdown that we get moved into.
And you mentioned before that like you might see the possibility of civil unrest, or like are like people expressing their dissatisfaction with the current situation. Is this something which is possible, which makes a difference in South Africa, or like, how can we imagine the situation? Because on the one hand, what's happening right now, we talked about this before, on YouTube, on Facebook, on other social media platforms, certain information is being removed, which like just maybe adds to the universe of information, and that just in itself is a situation independent to which opinion or to which like view you want to like look at, but just like the removal of information and taking the possibility to express an opinion is a worrisome fact. I don't know specifically about the situation in South Africa, but is that something you want to share a little bit about?
I think two things, Simon. The first is that you're either a person who loves to watch the news and absorb all of the stuff that comes at you, and in a sense, without you knowing it, it forms your truth and your opinion. And you might not like to hear it, but the reality is that your truth and your opinion is being dictated to by other people when you do that. And the other option is to just remove yourself from all of that. So certainly over the last 2 or 3 months, I've found a significant amount of people starting to remove themselves from social media and news channels, simply because it's very, very hard to know what the truth is in our new world. And I find it fascinating with my children to see that this is in a sense the reality that they are growing up into. I think our parents and our parents' parents 2 generations ago had a fair idea of what was right and what was wrong, and a moral code that they could live by. But it would seem that now it doesn't matter who you are or where you're at. You're able to form an opinion by the information that you allow to come in, and no one can tell you that you're wrong. So truth doesn't become absolute anymore. Truth becomes subjective, and it's a very, very challenging environment to find yourself in, and to try and build relationships in. You mentioned earlier my relationships with my staff, and that it's an extremely challenging environment to try and keep those relationships going. When you have such varied views, I have come across people that are absolutely pro the government and would like to stay in lockdown for they don't want the lockdown to end. And the simple reason that they don't want the lockdown to end is because they were receiving grants, government grants, prior to COVID. And when COVID came, the government gave them extra money. And so the longer lockdown lasts, the more money they get. The moment lockdown ends, they're going to get less money again. So you have a huge amount of people that are very, very happy to be in a lockdown state. And then you have the workforce that are desperate to get out of the lockdown state so that they can start earning money again and start returning to some form of normality. But as far as civil unrest is concerned, we haven't yet been exposed to any major civil unrest. Obviously, there's always some kind of civil unrest that's taking place, but we haven't, so far, we've avoided that. In South Africa, I always find South Africa is a country of enormous grace. Even when Mandela was released, I think everybody thought that the country would be erupted into civil war and unrest, and it was actually a very, very peaceful transition. So as a country, I believe we're very, very resilient, and we're able to come through these times. But right now, I think we're in an unprecedented recession and depression, which I don't think any of us anticipated. The challenge that we had was that just prior to COVID, as an economy, we were already very suppressed, and we were not doing very well. And then COVID hit us. So it's yeah, as I say, unimaginable times.
Yeah, just from a global perspective, what one can notice is that just the differential between large corporations, maybe wealthy, and smaller enterprises, and maybe people on the other spectrum, just the differential starts to further increase.
Yeah.
And I would imply, or would assume that that's also what is happening in South Africa right now. But is there? What I'm always curious now, if I'm it's a bit of becoming more curious and also looking at different viewpoints, and to make up a bit more holistic understanding of the world is, I'm always questioning whom does it serve? Who is benefiting from certain maybe rules or situations, and if you look at the situation in South Africa, could you, or would you want to think about is there someone benefiting from right now from the situation in South Africa? Because you here in Europe, or you could then also touch into controversial topics that vaccine industry is benefiting, and I'm not saying I'm against vaccines or not, but it's just by asking those questions, interesting to come up with who's benefiting. I'm not saying that's the reason, but those questions they lead to a different viewpoint, maybe a better understanding of what's happening. So
yes, yeah. Look, I think in South Africa there's no question that there are people benefiting, as is always the case. I kind of feel that that's something that is quite common, and not necessarily unique here in South Africa. And I think in South Africa, if you express opinion in these areas, you do run the risk of saying things that you should possibly not be saying in a public forum. And of course, they are opinion, but the world that we live in now is that you are held accountable for things that are put onto public platforms, and can be taken to task over those issues. But yes, I can absolutely confirm there are definitely people within our society that are benefiting, and will continue to benefit the longer the lockdown lasts. Just obviously two of the industries which I can certainly mention is the illegal alcohol and the illegal cigarette trade in South Africa is two areas that one can only imagine what's busy happening to those informal trades right now. very, very, very difficult to understand why the government initially stopped the sale of cigarettes and continues 2 months later, continues to enforce a ban on the sale of cigarettes. They have given their reasons, but they're very difficult to understand as to why they are good reasons. Not that I'm pro or for smoking, I'm just saying that there's no question that there are people that are benefiting. And yeah, I mean, to comment any more than that will start erring on the side of me giving political views, which are you know, which are challenging to give in this environment.
Yeah, I mean, I can only get a grasp on like how difficult the situation might be in South Africa, and like you shared a bit of your own situation, having a few companies and being also in a position where you like you cannot guarantee employment anymore for your staff, and like how do you, if you want to share, how do you deal with that situation if that's like or if you want just like
the situation is very, very difficult
to get.
It's very, very difficult right now, Simon. You know, even the staff that I've called back, in many cases I'm only able to pay them half their salaries. We're not able to work full time because there simply isn't demand for the product. So the work
right now, or like,
yes, we're producing. Yeah. They are working. So initially we started working on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday only.
Mm-hmm.
And from last week we started Monday.
That the lockdown is like terminated at some point, or?
Yes, I think we are all anticipating that. It's inevitable that the lockdown has to end at some point. But as a businessman, it's very hard to base decisions on overheads. So if we just talk purely very simple business economics here, your business has an overhead and it requires a certain turnover to be justifiable. Otherwise, it goes into a negative cash flow and it goes into a loss. And you can't sustain that indefinitely before you close down and go into business rescue or into liquidation. So when you as a businessman are not told when you can start operating properly, and the people that you are selling to can also not start their businesses, and you don't know when that's going to end, but you have overheads in terms of rentals and car leases and cell phone contracts and employment contracts that are costing you money, you can imagine how challenging it is as a business owner to start making decisions on specifically relationships and staff. How much do you pay them? And at what point do they say, look, they just can't work for this amount of money that you're paying them? And of course, an employer never sees the world the same way an employee does. They always have drastically different worldviews. So that is terribly, terribly challenging. And I mean, on a daily basis, we must be getting 50 to 100 WhatsApp messages from our staff saying, what's going on? What's going on? So, you know, case in point, we were told now last week that we will be moving to level 3 lockdown on the 1st of June. And level 3 lockdown is an opening of the economy. But the amount of protocols and regulations that we have to put in to our factory, we have to screen every single employee when they arrive. We have to test them. We have to take their temperature. We have to socially distance them. So within our factory, we've had to change our entire factory to make sure that they stay apart. We have to try and stagger work hours and have some come in at some point and some come in. The conditions under which we are having to work are, to say that they're challenging is an understatement of gargantuan proportions, because it's extremely challenging. And then you add to that as a business owner that you don't know, well, you certainly anticipate that the demand for your product is going to not be there anymore. You know, I think people have got such a big fright from COVID that their willingness to spend money, if they do have it, is severely, severely compromised. And I think people have got a very, very big fright on the power that the government has to be able to completely shut them down and incapacitate them to earn any money. And so the natural response will be to just hold on to what you have. I mean, we've definitely seen within the business environment that people that owe you money have not paid. And they've just kept the money to themselves. And when you phone them and they just say, look, there's no way we're giving you the money because we don't know how long this is going to last, and we don't know if we've got enough money for ourselves. So it's a very natural response. And if you try and extrapolate that throughout the entire economy, you can imagine the disaster that we're all sitting with.
Do you know anyone who had COVID?
I don't know anyone personally, but I mean, I know of just so many stories now within South Africa where people, first of all, we're now being told that half the tests that we're doing are inaccurate. We are also being told that the hospitals are being given a grant, or they're being given an amount of money if they have a COVID death. So every single death, whether it's from cancer or whether it's from tuberculosis or whether it doesn't matter what comorbidity it is, the death reason is COVID, because the hospital is incentivized to call it COVID. So, I mean, we're just operating in a crazy environment, and I can't tell you how many people that we know that have to go in for a little procedure. So they'll need to have a hip replaced or an eye operation or whatever, and they need to be tested, and they've shown no symptoms of COVID, but when they get tested, they get told you've had COVID. And so you need to go home for 14 days and isolate. And they're like, but geez, I haven't even been sick. And they say, yeah, but you've had COVID. So you need to go and isolate, and then you can come back for your procedure. So yeah, Simon, we're back to that place of what is truth and what isn't truth. I actually don't know anymore. I think there's so much out there on the science of COVID, and there's so much that we don't know. But the reality is that as a people, we have to carry on, whether COVID is here or not. And the question that we've been asking all along from the start is, if COVID is as dangerous as it is, it's inevitable that it's going to come. You can't stop it from coming, and you can't stop it from being transmitted. So why crash your entire economy to the ground and then be hit with COVID? So yeah, there's just many bizarre things that are busy happening in the world.
Yeah, and is there something like if someone now listens to this, is there something to be like, is there something we can do? Is there means to influence the situation? Is it like wait and hope? Is it to create awareness for, like, I would call it even the absurdness of the situation, which like doesn't fit any logical decision making process, like from my point of view?
Well, Simon, for me, it's something that I come back to time and time again, and I have many discussions with my peers around this particular topic, and that is, if you go back to the very reason why governing people are put in place, it would seem that governing people are put in place to look after the interests of the people. But you don't have to look very far to see that that's gone horribly wrong. And more than often, what happens is that they look after their own interests first, and the people suffer. And so it's really just a very global kind of picture of how far removed leaders and governing people are from the people on the ground. And in a diverse economy like South Africa, I can only imagine the challenge that our government faces, because they have such an unbelievably diverse people within the country. And so no matter what decision they make, they are going to disappoint a significant portion of the country. So if they make this decision, then these people will be unhappy. And if they make that decision, then these people will be unhappy. So I can't think that it is a very easy place for the government to be in. So yeah, I mean, in terms of help, I mean, gosh, Simon, how do you even begin to address that topic. It ultimately, when you start looking at things like this, it just boils down to very practical things of being able to give people a reason to live and to be able to provide for their basic needs, and give them some kind of hope that there's a better world out there. But right now, it's an unimaginable situation that we're busy facing. One can only hope that this is the bottom, and that it's not going to get much worse than this, and that we'll be able to build on this going forward. Unfortunately, in South Africa, there is a very clear agenda to do some what is referred to as radical economic transformation, which is really just a fancy way of saying that the previously disadvantaged populations would be given an advantage, which creates a terribly difficult situation for the people that were previously advantaged to any future within South Africa, because you're going to be blocked at every turn to be given preference to previously disadvantaged people. And it's a very challenging environment to see any hope for. But as I said before, we're so resilient, we're going to really try our best to rally our troops and get our businesses back up and running once we get let out, and see if we can start building from what's left after this.
Yeah, thank you, Etienne, very much for taking the time. And on the one hand, it's like I found it is really important to have people hear about the situation, to raise awareness, but then it's also like to like see the difficulty of the situation there, to raise awareness, to possibly like take action, influence the situation. But then also it is inspiring to see your humbleness, to your like, facing these challenges, but then also like, seeing your faith or your hope and like optimism that somehow this will like turn into potentially opportunity. So thank you really a lot for being here. And I know there's a lot of things going on right now, so it was most probably not your top priority to be here and talk about the situation, but thank you very much, Etienne.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Simon. It's always lovely to talk to you and to be a part of your life. So thank you.